Commander Lyra Venn stood on the bridge of her flagship watching the stars disappear one by one as enemy vessels blocked them out. The Karvoth Dominion had come with everything they had, and the Valyrian Republic was losing badly. 300 Valyrian ships faced over 2,000 Karvoth warships, and the battle was not going well at all. Lyra had been fighting this war for 3 years, and she was tired beyond measure. The Valyrians were peaceful people who built beautiful cities and created art that moved the soul. But war was not something they understood deeply. The Karvoth understood war perfectly, and they had been conquering worlds for centuries. Another explosion lit up the view screen as a Valyrian cruiser broke apart under plasma fire. 200 souls gone in an instant, and there was nothing Lyra could do to save them. Her tactical officer called out enemy positions, but they were everywhere now, surrounding Valyria Prime, like wolves around wounded prey. The orbital defense platforms were falling one after another, and soon the Karvoth would start bombarding the surface where billions of Valyrians waited in terror. Lyra looked at her communications officer and made a decision that felt like defeat, but might be their only hope. She ordered a distress signal sent on every frequency the Valyrians knew, broadcasting across the entire galaxy. The message was simple and desperate because there was no time for fancy words or diplomatic language. This is Commander Lyra Venn of the Valyrian Republic, and we are under attack by the Karvoth Dominion. Our homeworld will fall within days and billions will die. We are begging anyone who can hear this message to help us. Please, we have children here and elderly people and millions who have never heard anyone. The coordinates are attached and we will transmit continuously until our last ship falls. The message went out into the void, and Lyra wondered if anyone would even care enough to listen. The galaxy had many advanced species and powerful civilizations, but none of them seemed interested in helping others anymore. The Galactic Council talked endlessly about peace and cooperation, but when the Karvoth attacked, they called it an internal matter. The Nexari Collective had powerful fleets, but they hid behind their non-interference laws. The Zephlon Union refused to get involved, saying they feared the Karvoth might turn on them. Next, everyone had reasons and excuses, but nobody had the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. Hours passed and responses started coming in from various species across the galaxy. Most were polite rejections wrapped in diplomatic language about protocols and procedures. Some civilizations did not even bother to respond at all, which hurt more than the rejections did. Lyra felt hope draining away. As each negative response arrived and the battle continued to go badly, her fleet was down to less than 200 ships now, and Valyria Prime's last orbital platform had just gone dark. The Karvoth would begin their bombardment soon, and there would be nothing left to stop them. Then something unexpected happened, and the communications officer suddenly sat up straight in her chair. "Commander, we have a response, and it is not like the others." Lyra moved quickly to the communication station and read the message that had just arrived. The signal came from a distant sector of space that most civilizations ignored completely. The Sol system was what the database called it, and the dominant species there were called humans. The message was short and direct, without any diplomatic language or formal protocols. "Received your distress call, and the United Earth Fleet is en route to your position. Hold your position and protect your people, because help is coming." Lyra stared at the message, trying to process what she was reading. She quickly pulled up everything the Valyrian database had on this species called humanity. The file was thin, because humans had only achieved faster than light travel about 20 years ago. They were considered young and primitive by galactic standards, and most species avoided contact with them. The database had warnings attached to the human file, and they made Lyra pause. Humanity originated from a Class 12 death world, which meant their home planet was incredibly hostile. Most galactic species would die within hours if they visited Earth without protection. The gravity was crushing, and the atmosphere was corrosive, and the native life forms were all predators of some kind. Humans had evolved in that nightmare environment, which explained why other species found them unsettling. They were built dense with heavy bones and thick muscles needed to survive their brutal homeworld. Their history was filled with warfare because apparently they had spent most of their existence fighting each other. The Galactic Council had invited humanity to join once, but the humans declined, saying they needed more time to develop. Most species were relieved by this refusal because humans made them nervous. The database noted something else that caught Lyra's attention and made her heart beat faster. In their 20 years among the stars, humanity had engaged in 7 military conflicts with various hostile species and pirates. They had won every single engagement without exception. The database showed battle reports from species who had fought humans and survived barely. Human ships were described as heavily armed and incredibly tough, while human tactics were called aggressive and unpredictable. One report from a pirate fleet that attacked a human colony ship said the humans fought with a ferocity that terrified veteran raiders. The Valyrian High Council contacted Lyra, demanding to know who these humans were and whether they could actually help. Lyra explained what little she knew, and several council members expressed doubt. How could such a young species possibly stand against the Carvoth Dominion when established powers refused to fight? Elder Mira Salas, who led the council, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Do you believe they can help us, Commander Ven, or are we placing false hope in primitives who do not understand what they face? Lyra looked at the data again and thought about the fact that humans had never lost a battle. She thought about the warnings in the database about their violent history and their death world origins. She thought about how every other species had refused to help. But these humans had simply said they were coming. I believe they are our only chance, Chancellor, and I believe they would not have responded if they did not think they could make a difference. The council accepted this answer because they had no other options left. Lyra returned her attention to the battle and ordered her remaining ships to fight defensively. They had to survive until the humans arrived, if they arrived at all. The Carvoth pressed their advantage, sensing victory and pushing the Valyrian fleet back toward the planet. Warlord Krenth, who commanded the Carvoth forces, was known for his cruelty and his love of destroying beautiful things. He broadcast a message to the Valyrians demanding their immediate surrender. Your fleet is broken and your world is defenseless, so surrender now. And I will allow half your population to live as slaves. Refuse and I will bombard your cities until nothing remains but ash and memory. Lyra looked at the tactical display and saw that he was not bluffing. The Carvoth had moved bombardment ships into position and could begin firing on population centers within minutes. She thought about those billions of innocent people below who trusted her to protect them. She thought about the children playing in parks, and the elderly sitting in gardens, and all the ordinary people living ordinary lives. Then she thought about that message from the humans, saying help was coming. Lyra opened a channel to Warlord Krenth, and her voice was steady despite the fear she felt. We will never surrender to butchers and murderers. So do your worst, because the Valyrian people would rather die free than live as your slaves. Krenth laughed and cut the transmission. His bombardment ships began to move forward, and their weapons started charging up. Lyra closed her eyes briefly and whispered a prayer to God she was not sure she believed in anymore. Then every sensor on her ship went completely insane all at once. The space around Valyria Prime began tearing itself apart as massive distortions appeared at the edge of the system. Reality itself seemed to fold and twist as something enormous pushed through the fabric of normal space. The Valyrian sensors screamed warnings about spatial anomalies and energy readings that should not be possible. Then the anomalies split open like wounds in the universe, and ships began emerging from the impossible tiers. The United Earth Fleet had arrived, and they came in force. That took everyone's breath away. 400 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls dark and angular like floating fortresses. Where other species built elegant curved vessels, the humans had created brutal, efficient ships covered in weapons. Every surface bristled with gun turrets and missile pods and energy weapons that glowed with barely contained power. The flagship emerged last, and it was larger than anything Lyra had ever seen. The Liberty's Hammer was its name, and it dwarfed even the massive Carvoth battle cruisers. The dreadnought was 5 kilometers long and covered in armor plating, thick enough to stop anything. Admiral Helen Drake commanded the fleet from that massive ship, and her voice came across all frequencies. This is Admiral Helen Drake of the United Earth Fleet to Commander Lyra Ven. We received your distress call, and we are here to help pull your forces back, and let us handle this. Lyra could barely speak but managed to respond with gratitude flooding through her voice. The Karvoth fleet, which numbered 1,800 ships, immediately began redirecting toward the human newcomers. Warlord Krenth stared at his tactical display and started laughing at what he saw. These primitive humans had brought only 400 ships against his nearly 2,000. The odds were more than 4-1 in his favor, and he had crushed better fleets with worse numbers. Krenth opened a channel to the human flagship, and his voice dripped with contempt and amusement. "I am Warlord Krenth of the Karvoth Dominion, and you primitives have made a terrible mistake. You are outnumbered and outgunned, so I will give you one chance to leave now, and you may live to see your homes again. Stay, and I will crush you just like I crushed these pathetic Valyrians." There was a pause before Admiral Drake responded, and when she did, her voice was cold as ice. "This is Admiral Helen Drake, and I have a counteroffer for you. You have exactly 60 seconds to cease all hostilities and withdraw from this system. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why picking a fight with a Deathworld species is the last mistake you will ever make." The clock is ticking. Warlord Krenth's laughter echoed across the channel, and he cut the transmission. With a gesture, he ordered his entire fleet to advance and annihilate these arrogant humans who dared threaten him. The Karvoth armada surged forward in their standard battle formation that had won them 100 victories. Plasma cannons charged to full power, and missile batteries locked onto targets across the human formation. Lyra watched from her command ship, expecting to see the humans retreat, or at least adopt defensive positions. But the human fleet did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. They accelerated directly toward the Karvoth armada at speeds that should have been impossible for ships their size. The human formation was aggressive and tight, like predators charging toward prey without fear. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside Admiral Drake on the Liberty's hammer and called out targeting solutions. Jake was a veteran who had fought in the Mars Rebellion and the Titan blockade. He knew war better than most people knew peace, and his voice was calm, despite the impossible odds. "All ships, mark your targets and prepare to fire on my command. Primary targets are their command ships and carriers. Cut off the head and the body dies." The distance between the two fleets closed rapidly, and the Karvoth opened fire first. Thousands of plasma bolts screamed through space toward the human ships in a wave of destruction. Then the humans opened fire, and everything changed in an instant. Human railguns fired solid tungsten rounds at speeds approaching light itself. The rounds punched through Karvoth shields like they were not even there. They tore through armor and hulls and came out the other side, still traveling fast enough to hit the next ship. Missile pods opened, and thousands of warheads launched in coordinated waves. Missiles twisted and dodged through defensive fire with intelligence that seemed almost alive. When they hit Karvoth ships, the explosions were massive enough to vaporize entire sections of hull. Energy weapons of design nobody recognized sliced through multiple ships in single continuous beams. The beams cut through Karvoth formations like knives through paper, leaving molten metal and dead ships in their wake. In the first 60 seconds of combat, the humans destroyed or crippled 90 Karvoth vessels. 90 ships gone in 1 minute, and the Karvoth fleet reeled in shock and confusion. The Karvoth plasma weapons, which had devastated dozens of species, barely scratched the human shields. When plasma bolts did get through, they splashed harmlessly against armor so dense it seemed impossible. The human ships were built to survive in ways that defied every principle of starship construction. Their reactors output power levels that should have melted their own systems. Their weapons fired faster and hit harder than anything the Karvoth had encountered. Lyra watched the battle unfold on her view screen and could not believe what she was seeing. The humans were not just winning, they were dominating completely. Human tactics were ruthless and efficient, like nothing she had studied in her military training. They targeted command ships, first cutting off Karvoth coordination and leadership. They exploited every weakness in Karvoth formations with surgical precision. Small human destroyers outmaneuvered massive Karvoth battleships, getting inside their firing arcs. Once inside those arcs, the destroyers tore the battleships apart at close range with devastating efficiency. One of Lyra's officers whispered what everyone on the bridge was thinking. "They fight like they have been doing this forever." Lyra pulled up the human database file again and read it more carefully. This time, human history stretched back thousands of years, and almost all of it involved warfare. They had fought each other in countless wars using increasingly devastating weapons. They had refined warfare into both a science and an art, through millennia of brutal experience. Most species developed space travel, and then stopped fighting because cooperation was more logical. Humans developed space travel while still fighting and brought their warrior culture with them to the stars. They were born for this in ways that peaceful species could never match. The battle continued, and the Karvoth losses mounted, with terrifying speed. 200 Karvoth ships destroyed in 5 minutes, 300 destroyed in 10 minutes. The numbers kept climbing while human losses remained minimal. A few human destroyers took damage, but they kept fighting even when burning. Their crews evacuated to other ships, and the damaged vessels continued firing on automated systems. Warlord Krenth stared at his tactical display in growing horror. His mighty fleet was being torn apart by forces he did not understand. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had not experienced since childhood. He felt fear rising in his chest like cold water. The humans were not just winning. They were demonstrating a level of military capability that should not exist. He tried to rally his forces, but the Karvoth fleet was in chaos. Ship captains who had never known defeat were panicking and breaking formation. The careful battle plans that had conquered worlds were falling apart under human assault. Admiral Drake's voice cut across all channels, speaking to both fleets. "This is your final warning. Surrender now or be destroyed. We came here to protect the innocent, not to massacre you, but if you force our hand, we will finish this." Krenth screamed defiance and ordered his reserves. Forward 400 additional Karvoth ships that had been holding position near the planet began moving to reinforce. The human fleet detected the movement, and Jake Morrison smiled grimly. "They are committing everything now." Admiral Helen nodded and gave the order they had been waiting to give: launch all fighters and show them what Earth's best can do. The human carriers opened their massive hangar bays, and thousands of fighters poured out like angry insects. The Valyrians had never seen anything like it, because most species used automated drones for small craft combat. But every single human fighter had a living pilot inside controlling it with reflexes honed by evolution. These pilots trained in gravity wells 10 times stronger than most species could survive. They could handle maneuvers that would kill other species through sheer acceleration. Force Lieutenant Sophie Grant led her squadron called the Valkyries toward the Karvoth reinforcements. Sophie had flown combat missions since she was 20 years old, and she was 30 now. 10 years of combat experience made her one of the most dangerous pilots in the human fleet. Her voice crackled over the squadron channel as they accelerated toward the enemy Valkyrie. "Leader to all wings, and these bastards have been bullying peaceful species for too long time to show them what happens when they mess with our allies, target their carriers first, and cut off their ability to respond." The Valkyries dove toward a massive Karvoth carrier that was launching its own fighters, defensive fire-filled space around them, but Sophie and her pilots danced through it with practiced ease. They twisted and rolled and jinked in patterns that no automated system could predict or follow. Sophie lined up her attack run and locked onto the carrier's open hangar bay. She fired a full spread of missiles that streaked toward the target in tight formation. The missiles punched through the hangar entrance and detonated deep inside the carrier. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as fuel and ammunition cooked off. The entire carrier broke apart in a massive fireball that consumed a dozen smaller Karvoth ships nearby. All across the battlefield, human fighters were tearing through Karvoth formations with devastating efficiency. The Karvoth pilots were skilled and experienced, but they had never faced anything like human aggression. Human fighters did not retreat or show caution. They attacked relentlessly until the enemy was destroyed on the Liberty's hammer. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated the fleet's defensive screen. His tactical display showed a group of 30 Karvoth heavy cruisers attempting to break through toward the flagship. Jake calmly redirected 3 destroyers to intercept the enemy formation before it could get close. The destroyers, named Intrepid and Defiant and Resolute, moved into position with practiced precision. They opened fire simultaneously, and their combined firepower turned the Karvoth attack into a funeral pyre. 30 Karvoth ships destroyed in less than 2 minutes, and the human destroyers moved on to their next target's. Commander, Lyra Venn, watched all of this from her command ship and made a decision. The Valyrian fleet was battered and reduced, but they were not broken yet. She still had nearly 200 ships under her command, and They could make a difference. Lyra opened a channel to Admiral Drake and her voice was steady with new hope. Admiral, this is Commander Venn and my fleet is ready to rejoin the battle. What are your orders? Helen's response came immediately and there was approval in her tone. Good to hear, Commander, because we can use your help. There are 300 Karvoth ships trying to regroup at coordinates I am sending you. Now we will hit them from the front, and you come in from their flank. Let us show them what real coordination looks like. Lyra rallied her fleet and they moved into position with renewed purpose. For the first time in 3 years, the Valyrians were not fighting alone. For the first time, they had allies who knew how to win. The pincer movement executed perfectly as human and Valyrian forces struck simultaneously. Human firepower smashed through Karvoth defenses from the front. Valyrian ships provided tactical support and electronic warfare from the flank. The combination was devastating, and the trapped Karvoth ships had nowhere to run. Lyra's tactical mind meshed perfectly with Helen's aggressive strategy. The Valyrians jammed Karvoth communications, while the humans delivered killing blows. In 15 minutes, the 300 ship Karvoth formation ceased to exist. For the first time in years, Lyra and her people remembered what victory felt like. Lieutenant Chris Holland sat at his sensor station on the Liberty's hammer monitoring enemy movements. Chris was young, only 23 years old, but he was excellent at his job. He noticed something on his display that made his blood run cold. A large group of Karvoth ships was moving away from the main battle toward Valyria Prime. Their weapon systems were charging up and they were positioning themselves over the planet's largest cities. Chris realized instantly what was about to happen and shouted across the bridge, Captain Morrison, "They are going to bombard the civilian centers. Over 40 million people are in those cities." Sir Jake was at Chris's station in 3 long strides looking at the sensor data. His face went hard and he turned to the communications officer. "Get me every ship that can make intercept speed, and I mean every single one. Divert all available vessels to protect those cities." Now Admiral Drake heard the exchange and immediately approved the order. "All ships. This is the Admiral and we have Karvoth vessels moving to bombard civilian targets. I want every ship that can reach them to intercept immediately. Push your engines past safety limits if you have to. We did not come all this way to let innocent people die." 40 human ships broke formation and accelerated toward Valyria Prime at maximum speed. Their engines glowed white-hot from the strain as they pushed beyond their rated capabilities. The crews knew they might not survive, but none of them hesitated. They were racing to save people they had never met from a species they barely knew. But it was the human way to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Karvoth bombardment fleet numbered 60 heavy cruisers and they were seconds from firing. Their plasma cannons locked onto population centers where millions of Valyrians huddled in shelters praying for salvation. Then the human ships arrived, traveling so fast they left streaks across Valyrian sensors. The 40 human vessels threw themselves between the Karvoth fleet and Valyria Prime. They positioned themselves directly in the line of fire and prepared to take the hits meant for civilians below. The Karvoth fired and plasma bolts designed to crack planetary crust slammed into human shields. The human ships rocked under the impact as their shields flared bright enough to light up the night side of the planet. 3 destroyers took catastrophic damage, their hulls breaching and their systems failing. But they held their position even as fire consumed them. They held the line because behind them 40 million Valyrians lived and breathed. On the surface of Valyria Prime, people emerged from shelters and looked up at the sky. They saw human ships burning in orbit, absorbing fire that would have killed them all. They saw these strangers from across the stars giving their lives to protect people they did not know. Many Valyrians wept as they watched human ships sacrifice themselves. Then the rest of the human fleet arrived and the situation reversed completely. 200 human warships dropped out of high speed and opened fire on the bombardment fleet. The Karvoth ships, which had been focused on the planet, suddenly found themselves under massive attack. Human weapons fire came from every direction as the fleet surrounded the Karvoth vessels. There was no escape and no mercy for those who had tried to murder billions of innocents in less than 5 minutes. The entire Karvoth bombardment fleet was annihilated. 60 heavy cruisers reduced to expanding clouds of debris, and not one survived. Admiral Drake's voice cut across all channels and her tone was ice and fury combined. This is Admiral Helen Drake to all Karvoth forces, and you just tried to murder civilians. You just tried to genocide an entire species for no reason beyond cruelty. There will be no mercy now and no quarter given. You wanted a war and now you have one. We will hunt down every single one of your ships. The battle entered its final phase and the Karvoth fleet began to collapse completely. Ship captains who had terrorized dozens of species now fled in panic. But the human fleet was everywhere, cutting off escape routes and destroying anyone who tried to run. Sophie Grant and her Valkyries hunted fleeing Karvoth cruisers through the debris field. Her missiles found targets with perfect accuracy, and each hit meant one less Karvoth ship to threaten innocent people. Jake Morrison coordinated strike groups with mechanical efficiency. Every Karvoth vessel was tracked and engaged and none escaped. The net Lyra Ven and her Valyrian fleet fought alongside the humans with newfound confidence. They had learned from watching human tactics and applied those lessons with deadly effect. Warlord Krenth watched his empire crumble on the screens around him. 2,000 ships had become 1,000 and then 500, and now less than 200. Remained the humans had done in hours what should have been impossible. They had shattered the mightiest fleet the Karvoth Dominion had ever assembled. Krenth looked at his remaining ships and knew he had only one option left if he could kill the human. Admiral, perhaps the fleet would falter and he might still escape. He ordered his flagship and 50 heavy cruisers to make a suicide run at the Liberty's Hammer. They would ram the human dreadnought and take it down with them. The Karvoth ships charged, forward engines blazing as they accelerated toward the human flagship. Helen saw them coming and a cold smile crossed her face. If they wanted to die that badly, she was more than happy to help them along. Admiral Helen Drake stood on the bridge of the Liberty's Hammer and gave orders that sealed Warlord Krenth's fate. All batteries concentrate fire on incoming targets and target their engines first. Marines prepare for boarding action in case any of them survive long enough to reach us. If they want death so badly, then we will deliver it. The Liberty's Hammer transformed into a fortress of destruction as every weapon system came online. Railguns tracked the incoming Karvoth ships and began firing in precise sequence. Each tungsten round found its target tearing through Karvoth hulls like paper missile batteries, launched wave after wave of warheads that turned space into a killing field. Energy weapons carved brilliant lines through the darkness, cutting Karvoth ships into pieces. The 50 Karvoth heavy cruisers disappeared in the storm of fire like candles blown out by a hurricane. Only Warlord Krenth's flagship survived long enough to reach the Liberty's Hammer. The Karvoth vessel was burning and breached in dozens of places. Its shields were gone and its weapons were offline. But momentum carried it forward, and it collided with the Liberty's Hammer's heavily armored bow. The impact sent shockwaves through both ships, and alarms blared across the human dreadnought. Captain Jake Morrison checked the damage reports and nodded with satisfaction. Minimal damage to our hull, Admiral, and their ship is stuck to us. Boarding parties are ready to go. Helen's response was immediate. And cold send them in. And I want Krenth alive if possible. He needs to answer for his crimes. Sergeant. Kevin Brooks led the Marine assault into the Karvoth flagship. Kevin was a veteran of the Mars Rebellion, where he had fought in brutal close quarters combat for months. His squad of 20 Marines was equipped with powered armor and weapons designed for boarding actions. They breached the Karvoth hull and entered a nightmare of smoke and fire. The Karvoth were large, powerful beings who stood nearly 3 meters tall. They were known across the galaxy as fierce warriors who never surrendered, but they had never faced human Marines in close quarters. Combat. The first group of Karvoth soldiers charged the breach point with energy blades and plasma rifles. Kevin and his squad met them with overwhelming firepower and tactical precision. Human assault rifles fired armor-piercing rounds at rates that overwhelmed Karvoth defenses. The Karvoth warriors fell one after another, unable to match human aggression and coordination. Kevin's squad moved through the ship, systematically clearing each section. They encountered resistance at every turn, but the Karvoth were demoralized and disorganized. Many Karvoth soldiers threw down their weapons and surrendered when they saw humans coming. The reputation of these Deathworld warriors had spread quickly among the Karvoth ranks. Within 20 minutes, Kevin's team reached the bridge where Warlord Krenth waited with his personal guard. The bridge doors were sealed and heavily reinforced. Kevin simply attached breaching charges and stood back as they detonated. The Marines stormed through the smoke and engaged Krenth's elite guards. The fight was brief and brutal. Karvoth guards were skilled but human. Marines were better trained and better equipped. When the smoke cleared, Warlord Krenth stood alone surrounded by dead guards. He was wounded and bleeding, but still defiant. Kevin removed his helmet and stared at the warlord who had terrorized so many. Species Kevin's face bore scars from old battles and his eyes held no mercy. "It is over, Warlord, and your fleet is destroyed. Your invasion is finished. You are going to answer for every civilian you murdered." Krenth stared at Kevin in disbelief. "How is this possible, and you are primitives? Your species has been in space for barely 20 years. Kevin's smile was cold and held no humor. "That is where you made your mistake. And you thought young meant weak. You did not bother to learn where we come from, evolved on a planet that tries to kill everything that lives there. We survived because we learned to be tougher and meaner than anything else. You picked a fight with Deathworlders, and that was your last mistake." Kevin's squad restrained Krenth and transported him to the Liberty's hammer across the battlefield. The remaining Karvoth ships saw their leader captured, and their will broke completely. Admiral Drake broadcast on all frequencies one final time. "Attention all Karvoth vessels, and your warlord is in our custody. Your fleet is destroyed. You have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and engines. Surrender and you will be treated according to the laws of war. Continue to resist, and you will be destroyed. Choose now." One by one, the Karvoth ships went dark as their crews surrendered. Out of the original force of 2,200 vessels, fewer than 100 remained intact. The battle was over. The Karvoth Dominion, which had conquered 12 worlds and terrorized dozens of species, had been shattered in under 6 hours. Commander Lyra Venn stared at her tactical display, unable to process what she was seeing. Her sensors showed the impossible truth. The human fleet had suffered only 23 ship losses, and those had been mostly smaller vessels. Even those crews had been evacuated before their ships were destroyed. Against overwhelming numerical superiority, the humans had achieved victory so complete, it defied belief. Lyra opened a channel to Admiral Drake, and her voice trembled with emotion. "Admiral, I do not know how to thank you. You saved us. You saved our world and our people. We owe you a debt we can never repay." Helen's response was characteristically direct. "Commander, you sent out a distress call and we answered. That is what decent people do. That is what allies do. Besides, we meant what we said in our message. We are here to help." Valyrian rescue ships began moving through the debris field, helping damaged human vessels. Medical teams beamed across to treat injured. Human crew members, engineers helped repair damaged systems on ships that had pushed themselves beyond safe limits. For the first time in 3 years, the Valyrians were not fighting for survival. They were celebrating victory and helping those who had made victory possible. On Valyria Prime, billions of people emerged from shelters into sunlight. They looked up at the sky where human ships held position like steadfast guardians. Spontaneous celebrations erupted across every city. People danced in the streets and wept with joy. Children who had known only war now had hope for peace. Elder Mira Salas, who led the Valyrian High Council, broadcast a message to the entire planet. "My fellow Valyrians, today, we were saved by strangers. We sent a desperate call into the void expecting nothing. But humanity answered when no one else would. They traveled across the stars to fight for us. They gave their lives to protect ours. From this day forward, humanity will always be welcome on our world. They came as strangers, but they leave as family." The message resonated across Valyria Prime, and throughout the Republic, humanity had done more than win a battle. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to stand up for those who could not defend themselves. News of the battle began spreading across the galaxy, through faster-than-light communications. The species who had refused to help the Valyrians now learned what they had missed. The Galactic Council, which had called the conflict an internal matter, watched nervously. The civilizations that had dismissed humanity as primitive now realized their mistake. Humanity was not primitive. They were dangerous in ways the galaxy had not seen before, but they used that danger to protect rather than conquer. They had strength beyond measure, but they chose compassion. Admiral Drake stood on the bridge of the Liberty's hammer, looking at Valyria Prime through the view screen. Captain Jake Morrison joined her, and together they watched the celebrations on the planet. Below, we made a difference today, Jake. Those people down there get to live because we answered their call. Jake nodded and his voice was quiet. This is what we trained for, Admiral. This is why we built these ships and why we push ourselves so hard so that when someone needs help, we can give it. Helen smiled and turned from the view screen. Get me Commander Venn on the line and we have work to do. We need to discuss what comes next. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Helen Drake and Commander Lyra Venn met in person for the first time. The meeting took place in the Hall of Unity on Valyria Prime, where the High Council conducted important business. Lyra waited at the landing pad as the shuttle from the Liberty's Hammer descended. She was nervous because she was about to meet the woman who had saved her entire civilization. The shuttle doors opened, and Admiral Drake stepped out in her dress uniform. Helen was tall for a human, standing almost 2 meters high. Her uniform still bore scorch marks from the battle, because she had not bothered to change it. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and held the weight of someone who had seen too much war. But when she smiled, at Lyra the smile was genuine and warm. Commander Venn, it is good to finally meet you. Face to face, Lyra extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting that she had learned. Admiral Drake, the honor is mine. You and your people gave us back our future. Together, they walked to the Hall of Unity through streets filled with Valyrians who cheered and waved. Children ran up to Helen offering flowers and drawings they had made. Helen accepted each gift with grace and kind words. The Hall of Unity was packed with council members and citizens who wanted to witness this historic moment. Elder Mira Solis stood at the center of the chamber, waiting to address Admiral Drake. Mira was ancient even by Valyrian standards, and she had led her people through the darkest years of the war. Admiral Drake, you and your people have given us something we thought lost forever. You gave us hope. You came when no one else would. You fought for us when the galaxy turned its back. The Valyrian Republic owes humanity a debt we can never fully repay. Helen stood before the assembled council and spoke with quiet conviction. Chancellor and members of the council and people of Valyria, we did not come here seeking gratitude or payment. We came because it was the right thing to do. In humanity's history, we learned a hard truth. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. We will not stand by while innocents suffer. She paused and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of those gathered. The galaxy called us primitive, and they called us barbaric. They feared us because we come from a harsh world and know how to fight. But they misunderstand us. Yes, we know war because we have endured it for thousands of years. But we also know peace, and we know justice. We know that strength without compassion is tyranny. We fight so that others do not have to. The hall erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. Valyrians who had never seen humans before this week now cheered for them as heroes and saviors. When the applause finally died down, Helen continued. We propose more than friendship today. We propose partnership. Humanity has strength and military prowess. Your people have advanced science and culture and diplomatic wisdom. Together we can build something the galaxy has never seen. Alliance based not on fear or conquest, but on mutual respect and protection of the innocent. The Valyrian Council voted unanimously to approve the alliance within hours. Treaty documents were prepared and signed in a ceremony broadcast across both worlds. The Treaty of Unity established mutual defense and technology sharing and cultural exchange. For the first time in galactic history, a Deathworld species and a peaceful republic forged a bond of brotherhood. News of the alliance spread across the galaxy faster than the battle reports had. Other species began paying attention to humanity in ways they never had before. The Galactic Council watched nervously as humanity established its first formal alliance. They had dismissed humans as too primitive to matter. Now they realized that had been a critical miscalculation. Species that valued peace or had suffered from aggression began sending inquiries to Earth. The Thalon Assembly had survived a recent Karvoth attack and asked if humanity would help defend them. The Mirian coalition, whose borders faced hostile empires, requested military advisors. The Kirin Union, whose merchant ships suffered constant piracy, asked for escort protection. All of them asked the same basic question: would humanity help them too? Lieutenant Sophie Grant walked through a memorial garden on Valyria Prime with Commander Lyra Venn. They had become friends in the days after the battle. Sophie found the Valyrian culture fascinating, and Lyra was eager to learn. About humanity. Lyra asked the question that puzzled all Valyrians. Sophie, your people are so powerful, and you could dominate the galaxy if you wished. Why do you choose to protect instead of conquer? Sophie considered the question carefully before answering. Because we remember what it is like to be vulnerable. In our history, humanity nearly destroyed itself multiple times. We have known tyranny and oppression and genocide. We have made terrible mistakes, but we learned from them. We decided that our strength should be used to prevent others from suffering what we suffered. We protect because we know the alternative. We fight so that species like yours can live in peace. Admiral Drake prepared to return to Earth, but she left behind a permanent garrison, 50 ships, and their crews would remain to help train the Valyrian Defense Force. They would serve as a deterrent against future aggression. Captain Jake Morrison volunteered to lead this garrison. It was humanity's first permanent military presence outside the Sol system. Before departing, Helen stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city of Valyria. Prime Lyra joined her, and together they watched the sunset. 2 worlds worth of stars slowly appeared in the darkening sky. What you have done here will change the galaxy. You have shown everyone that power can be used for good, that strength and compassion are not opposites. Helen smiled, and her voice was quiet. We just answered a call for help. But you are right about one thing. This changes everything. The galaxy has been ruled by fear and intimidation for too long. Now there is an alternative. Now there is hope, as the Liberty's hammer prepared for the journey home. Admiral Drake recorded a final message for Earth Command. Her words carried immense weight. Mission accomplished, and the Valyrian Republic is secure. Alliance established. We have proven that humanity's place among the stars is not as conquerors, but as guardians. The galaxy sent out an SOS and we answered, and we will answer again every time for as long as we are needed. The message reached Earth to thunderous approval. The United Earth government authorized expansion of the fleet. They established the Guardian Initiative dedicated to responding to distress calls from peaceful species. In the months that followed, the Treaty of Unity bore fruit. Human and Valyrian scientists collaborated on revolutionary technologies. Cultural exchanges brought human art and music to Valyrian worlds. Earth hosted Valyrian philosophers and historians. Children on both worlds learned about their new allies in schools. The Carvoth Dominion never recovered from its defeat. With its fleet destroyed and its warlord captured, the empire fragmented into squabbling factions. Former subject species seized their chance and rebelled. Within a year, the Dominion ceased to exist. Warlord Krenth faced trial for war crimes on Valyria. Prime, human legal advisors helped ensure justice was served properly. The Galactic Council eventually extended a formal invitation to humanity. The offer came with conditions attempting to limit human influence. Admiral Drake, now promoted to fleet. Admiral politely declined. We appreciate the offer, but we have seen how you operate. You talk while peaceful species burn. You debate while innocents die. You prioritize stability over justice. Humanity chooses a different path. We will build our own alliance based on action, rather than words. Within 2 years, the Unity Alliance grew to include 17 species, all united under a simple charter of mutual defense and shared prosperity. An unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. On the 5th anniversary of the Battle of Valyria, Prime, a memorial was unveiled. It bore the names of all who died defending the world, Valyrian defenders, and human crew members who gave their lives. Even Carvoth soldiers, because Helen insisted all fallen warriors deserve remembrance. At the dedication, Helen spoke words that would be quoted for generations. 5 years ago, a desperate signal reached across the stars. It could have been ignored. It should have been ignored by the logic of politics and self-interest, but it was not. Because when someone cries for help, when innocents face destruction, humanity answers. Always. That is our promise to the galaxy. That is our legacy to the stars. As the ceremony concluded, children from both species played together in the memorial gardens. Human and Valyrian officers shared stories and laughter. Scientists from a dozen worlds collaborated on projects benefiting everyone. This Was the future born from one answered distress call? Not domination, but cooperation. Not empire, but friendship. The galaxy watched and learned. The Deathworlders from Sol, once feared and dismissed, had become guardians of peace. Their invincible fleet, born from a harsh world and honed by millennia of conflict, now served as a shield for the vulnerable. And whenever a new SOS reached across the stars, whenever aggression threatened the innocent, the same message went out. The United Earth Fleet is en route. Hold. Your position, help is coming, and help always came.